The fluorescent lights of the 45th floor cast their cold glow across Marcus Sterling's executive suite, where leather-bound contracts and crystal awards gleamed like trophies of corporate conquest. At nearly 11 p.m., the Sterling Corporation building stood almost empty except for the night cleaning crew and one very important man preparing for what could be the deal of his lifetime. Sterling adjusted his $5,000 suit jacket and straightened his platinum cufflinks as he arranged documents across his mahogany desk. Tomorrow's meeting with international partners would seal a $100 million trade agreement, and every piece of paperwork had to be perfect. The French legal documents, translated at considerable expense by the city's most prestigious translation firm, represented months of meticulous preparation. 3 weeks and $50,000 for these translations, he muttered to himself, running his fingers over the crisp pages. Worth every penny when you're dealing with people who understand quality. The sound of footsteps in the hallway barely registered in his consciousness. Night shift workers were invisible to Sterling, existing in his world only as necessary shadows who kept his empire spotless while he slept. He had more pressing concerns than acknowledging the help. Emma Rodriguez pushed through the heavy glass doors of the executive floor, her worn sneakers silent against the polished marble. Her backpack, faded and patched with duct tape in 2 places, hung heavy on her 15-year-old shoulders. Inside were textbooks from the public library, a laptop older than most of her classmates' phones, and something else she kept hidden from everyone, including her mother. The teenager's dark eyes swept the luxurious hallway, taking in oil paintings that probably cost more than her family's annual rent. She clutched a plastic water bottle, condensation beading on its surface as she made her way toward the CEO's office. Her mother, Maria, had been working late again, and Emma knew she'd find her somewhere on this floor, methodically cleaning offices that reeked of expensive cologne and ambition. "Mama?" Emma called softly, pushing open the door she assumed led to a supply closet. Instead, she found herself face to face with Marcus Sterling himself, who looked up from his documents with the expression of a man discovering a cockroach in his coffee. Sterling's steel-grey eyes narrowed as he took in the sight before him. A teenage girl in thrift store clothes stood in his doorway, clearly out of place among the imported furniture and original artwork. His jaw tightened with the particular kind of irritation reserved for disruptions to his perfectly ordered world. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Sterling's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "This is a private office, not a playground." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, her grip tightening on the water bottle until the plastic crackled. "I'm so sorry, sir. I was just looking for my mom. She works the night shift and—" But as she spoke, her nervous energy got the better of her. The water bottle slipped from her sweaty palm, bounced off the edge of Sterling's desk, and exploded across the carefully arranged documents. Ice-cold water soaked through paper worth more than most people's cars, turning crisp legal text into smeared, illegible blotches. Sterling shot to his feet so fast his leather chair spun backward. "What have you done?" His voice rose to a roar that seemed to shake the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Those are legal documents for a $100 million deal!" Emma stared in horror at the spreading puddle of water and ruined paper, her face draining of color. The important-looking documents were dissolving before her eyes, ink running like black tears down pages that had taken weeks to perfect. Her hands shook as she reached for the soggy papers, desperate to salvage something, anything. "I'm so sorry. Please, I can fix this. I can translate them again for you." The words tumbled out of her mouth in a panic-stricken rush. Sterling looked at her as if she'd just offered to perform brain surgery with a butter knife. His eyes traveled from her scuffed shoes to her discount store sweater, taking in every detail that screamed poverty and irrelevance. When he finally spoke, his voice dripped with condescension. "You? A kid whose mother scrubs toilets for a living? You think you can handle international legal documents?" He let out a bark of laughter that held no humor whatsoever. "Tell you what, kid. If you can translate these documents perfectly, my entire salary will be yours, every last cent." Emma felt something shift inside her chest, like a switch being flipped. The fear began to transform into something harder, hotter. Here was this man in his expensive suit, looking down at her like she was nothing, dismissing her and her mother as if they were less than human. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, but steady. Do you really mean that, sir?" Sterling's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, I'm dead serious, sweetheart. But when you fail, and you will fail, you and your mother are banned from this building forever. Security will escort you both out, and I'll make sure neither of you ever works in this city again." Emma Rodriguez stood in that opulent office, water still dripping from the ruined documents onto her worn sneakers, and felt 15 years of being underestimated crystallize into pure determination. She looked up at Marcus Sterling with eyes that suddenly held something he didn't expect to see: complete and utter fearlessness. "I accept your challenge, Mr. Sterling." To understand what happened next, you need to know who Emma Rodriguez really was beneath the thrift store clothes and apologetic smiles. While Sterling saw only the daughter of his cleaning lady, Emma carried within her a secret that would have shocked him to his core. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., while her classmates slept in comfortable suburban bedrooms, Emma rose in the cramped two-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing, and the heating worked only when it felt like it, but Emma had learned to find quiet corners where she could study. Her bedroom doubled as her study, library, and sanctuary, where textbooks in 7 different languages sat stacked beside her second-hand desk. The backpack that Sterling had dismissed as the cheap accessory of a poor kid actually contained treasures that most adults would kill for. Hidden beneath her geometry homework and English essays were language certificates that represented hundreds of hours of solitary study. Cambridge English Level C2, DELF, C2 for French, Goethe C2 for German, JLPT N1 for Japanese. Each one earned through countless nights of study while her mother worked double shifts to keep food on their table. Emma's father had died when she was 8, leaving behind only debts and a 7-language dictionary that had belonged to his own immigrant father. That dictionary had become Emma's most prized possession, its pages worn soft from constant use. On the night of his funeral, as 8-year-old Emma sat beside her crying mother, she had made a promise that would shape the next 7 years of her life. "I'm going to learn every language in Daddy's book," she had whispered to her mother in Spanish. "And someday, I'm going to make sure nobody ever looks down on us again." What began as a child's promise had evolved into an obsession. Emma devoured languages the way other teenagers consumed social media. She found free online courses, borrowed university textbooks from the library, and spent her lunch money on language learning apps. When her public school's limited foreign language program couldn't keep up with her hunger for knowledge, she taught herself through YouTube videos made by professors from universities she could never afford to attend. The cruel irony was that Emma had been offered full scholarships to 3 Ivy League universities, opportunities that would have transformed her life overnight. The acceptance letters were hidden in her backpack, along with everything else she couldn't bear to share with her mother. How could she abandon the woman who had sacrificed everything for her? How could she leave Maria to face the world alone, cleaning offices for people who treated her like furniture? So Emma had quietly declined the scholarships and instead took evening jobs tutoring immigrant children in the community center, using her gift for languages to help families navigate the same challenges her own family faced daily. The money wasn't much, but it helped cover groceries and her mother's medical bills from a workplace injury that Sterling's company's insurance had fought tooth and nail to avoid paying. As Emma stood in Sterling's office, surrounded by luxury she could never afford, Her mind raced through everything that had led to this moment. She thought about her mother, probably somewhere in this building at that very moment, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces while rich men in expensive suits made jokes about people like them. She thought about her father's dictionary waiting in her backpack like a secret weapon. She thought about all the times she had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed because of her zip code and her mother's job title. The water was still spreading across Sterling's desk, but Emma no longer saw it as a disaster. She saw it as opportunity disguised as catastrophe, the kind of chance that might never come again. Her hand stopped shaking as she looked Sterling directly in the eye. "I need exactly 1 hour," Emma said quietly. "And I need you to stop underestimating people based on what they wear or where they come from." Sterling laughed again, but this time Emma heard something else underneath the mockery. Uncertainty. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Sterling was looking at someone who wasn't intimidated by his wealth, his position, or his threats. And somewhere deep in his businessman's instincts, an alarm bell was starting to ring. Sterling's laughter filled the office like the sound of breaking glass, sharp and cutting. He loosened his tie and settled back into his leather chair with the confidence of a man who had never lost a bet in his life. Around him, the trappings of his success gleamed in the fluorescent light. Awards from international trade organizations, photographs of himself shaking hands with senators and foreign ministers, and a wall of degrees from universities that cost more per year than most people's houses. 1 hour, Sterling repeated, his voice thick with amusement. Sweetheart, professional translators with decades of experience spent 3 weeks on those documents, teams of people with law degrees and linguistics PhDs. But sure, let's watch a 15-year-old janitor's daughter work miracles. Emma knelt beside the desk and began carefully separating the soggy papers, trying to salvage what text remained legible. The French legal terminology was still partially visible on some pages, and her brain automatically began processing the complex sentence structures even as water continued to drip onto the floor. She looked up at Sterling with an expression that was becoming less apologetic and more determined by the minute. "I can read what's left of these pages," Emma said, her voice growing stronger. "The watermarks are still visible, and most of the text is recoverable. I can recreate the original translations and improve on any errors in the process." Sterling stood up and walked around his desk, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. He stopped directly in front of Emma, using his height and position to loom over her in a display of dominance that had intimidated board members and business rivals for decades. "Errors?" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Are you suggesting that Kellerman and Associates, the most prestigious legal translation firm in the state, made mistakes? These people charge $800 per page precisely because they don't make errors." Emma didn't flinch under his gaze. Instead, she picked up one of the least damaged pages and pointed to a paragraph in the middle. "This section about intellectual property rights. The French phrase droits patrimoniaux has been translated as patrimonial rights, but in this legal context, it should be economic rights or property rights. The translation is technically correct, but legally imprecise." Sterling's confident smirk faltered for just a moment. He grabbed the page from Emma's hands and studied it closely, his eyes scanning text that might as well have been hieroglyphics to him. The truth was, Sterling spoke only English, and his success in international business relied entirely on translators, interpreters, and subordinates who handled the linguistic complexities he couldn't master. "Lucky guess," he said finally, tossing the paper back onto the desk. "Anyone can pick out a phrase and claim it's wrong. But you want to play this game? Fine, let's raise the stakes." Sterling walked to his office door and locked it with a decisive click. The sound echoed in the silence like a prison cell closing. When he turned back to Emma, His expression had hardened into something darker and more threatening. "Here's how this works, kid. You have exactly 1 hour to perfectly translate every single document on this desk. Not just the French ones. There are German contracts in there too, and some Spanish addendums. If you succeed, which you won't, I'll honor my word about the salary. But when you fail, and you will fail, the consequences go beyond just you and your mother losing your jobs." Emma's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. "What do you mean?" Sterling's smile was predatory now, like a shark scenting blood in the water. "I mean, I'll personally ensure that your mother never works in this industry again. I'll blacklist her with every cleaning service, every janitorial company, every building management firm in this city. And as for you, I'll make sure every college admissions office knows about the little vandal who destroyed important business documents and then tried to scam her way out of consequences." The threat hit Emma like a physical blow. Her mother had already struggled to find steady work after her injury, and the cleaning job at Sterling Corporation was the best position she'd had in years. The health insurance alone was worth more than gold to their family. And college, Emma's secret dream of higher education, would become impossible if Sterling followed through on his threat. But instead of breaking under the pressure, Emma felt something else entirely. The same fire that had driven her to master 7 languages while her classmates worried about social media drama. The same determination that had made her decline Ivy League scholarships to stay with her mother blazed to life in her chest. "You really think you can destroy our lives just because you have money?" Emma said quietly. It wasn't a question. Sterling shrugged. "Money is power, sweetheart. And power means never having to explain yourself to people who don't matter." Emma looked around the office again, but this time she wasn't intimidated by the luxury. Instead, she saw it for what it really was, a monument to insecurity, built by a man who needed gold-plated everything to feel important. She thought about her mother, who had raised a daughter while working 2 jobs and never once complained about the unfairness of it all. She thought about her father, who had died with dignity despite never owning anything more valuable than a 7-language dictionary. "You're wrong about one thing, Mr. Sterling," Emma said as she sat down at his desk and opened her backpack. "People like my mother and me, we matter more than you think, and we're a lot stronger than you realize." As Emma pulled out her father's dictionary and her ancient laptop, Sterling laughed one more time. But the sound was different now, forced and brittle. For the first time in 30 years of business, Marcus Sterling was beginning to suspect that he might have underestimated his opponent. And in the corporate world where he ruled supreme, underestimation was often the first step toward defeat. The clock on Sterling's wall showed 10:47 p.m. Emma had exactly 1 hour to save her family's future, armed with nothing but her wits, her father's dictionary, and a secret that was about to shake Sterling's world to its foundation. Emma's fingers moved across her laptop keyboard with the fluid precision of a concert pianist, her eyes scanning the water-damaged documents as she began to reconstruct the original text from memory and context clues. Sterling had positioned himself in his leather chair like a judge preparing to deliver a death sentence, but his confident smirk was beginning to waver as he watched the teenager work. "Let me start with the French contract regarding intellectual property transfers," Emma said, without looking up from her screen. Her voice had transformed from the nervous stammering of a caught trespasser into the calm confidence of someone completely in their element. "The original translation states that the licensee shall maintain patrimony over derivative works, but the correct legal interpretation should be the licensee shall retain economic rights over derivative works." Sterling leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "You're just parroting what you said before. Anyone can memorize a phrase." Emma continued typing, her fingers never slowing. "Article 12, Section 3 discusses force majeure clauses, but the translation incorrectly renders cas fortuit as fortuitous case instead of unforeseen circumstances. In international contract law, this distinction could void the entire agreement if challenged in court. The color began to drain from Sterling's face. He had no way to verify Emma's claims, but something in her tone, the casual authority with which she discussed complex legal concepts, sent warning signals through his business-trained instincts. The German addendum is even more problematic, Emma continued, switching to a page that was barely legible through the water damage. The phrase Gewährleistungsausschluss has been translated as warranty disclaimer, but in this specific context, it should be exclusion of liability for defects. The legal implications are completely different. Sterling's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. Where did you learn this? For the first time since she'd started working, Emma looked up from her laptop. Her dark eyes held no trace of the frightened child who had stumbled into his office an hour ago. I taught myself, Mr. Sterling. Every night after school, every weekend, every holiday. While my classmates were at parties or shopping malls, I was in the public library studying international law and linguistic theory. Sterling's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Self-taught? Emma nodded and returned to her typing. My father left me a dictionary when he died. It had legal terminology in 7 languages. I started with that and expanded from there. Online university courses, borrowed textbooks, language exchange programs with international students. It took me 6 years to reach professional proficiency. The silence in the office was broken only by the soft clicking of Emma's keyboard and the increasingly rapid sound of Sterling's breathing. He reached for his phone with trembling fingers and dialed a number he knew by heart. Kellerman and Associates. A professional voice answered, despite the late hour. This is Marcus Sterling. I need you to verify something immediately. Sterling said, his eyes never leaving Emma's concentrated face. The French contract for the Marseille Partnership, Section 12, Article 3. What's your translation of cas fortuit? There was a pause, followed by the sound of papers rustling. We have it as fortuitous case, Mr. Sterling. Is there a problem with the translation? Sterling's face went ashen. And Droit's patrimonio in the intellectual property section? Patrimonial rights, sir. Again, is there an issue we need to address? Sterling hung up without answering and immediately dialed another number. When the second translation firm confirmed Emma's corrections word for word, he set his phone down with hands that shook visibly. How is this possible? Sterling asked, his voice hollow with disbelief. Emma saved her work and turned to face him fully. Because I had to be better than everyone else just to survive, Mr. Sterling. When you grow up poor, when people look at your clothes and your address and decide you don't matter, you learn to prove them wrong in ways they can't ignore. Sterling stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Why aren't you working for major corporations? Why isn't Harvard or Yale beating down your door? Emma's expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the vulnerable teenager beneath the linguistic prodigy. Because my mother needs me. She was injured at work 2 years ago, not here, but at another company that treated her just like you did tonight. The medical bills nearly bankrupted us, and she still has trouble with heavy lifting. I can't abandon her to chase my own dreams. The weight of Emma's words settled over the office like a heavy blanket. Sterling found himself thinking about his own privileged childhood, the private tutors and elite schools that had been handed to him without question. He had never worked for anything the way this girl had worked for everything. But you could have any career you wanted, Sterling said quietly. Emma nodded. Someday, maybe, but not at the cost of leaving behind the person who sacrificed everything for me. My mother taught me that family comes first, and success means nothing if you gain it by stepping on the people who love you. Sterling's phone rang again, jarring him from his thoughts. This time it was his international business partner calling from France. "Marcus, we need to discuss some concerns about the contract translations," the heavily accented voice said. "Our legal team has found several discrepancies that could cause problems during ratification." Sterling looked at Emma, who was quietly organizing the corrected documents into neat piles. "What kind of discrepancies, Jean-Pierre?" "Technical issues with legal terminology. Nothing that cannot be fixed, but we will need new translations before tomorrow's meeting. Can your team handle the corrections overnight?" Sterling's eyes met Emma's across the desk. In that moment, he realized that this 15-year-old girl sitting in his office had just saved his $100 million deal from potential collapse. The prestigious translation firm he had paid $50,000 had nearly cost him everything through their careless errors. "Yes," Sterling said slowly, still looking at Emma. "I believe we can handle the corrections." The clock on Sterling's wall read 11:47 p.m. when Emma finished printing the last corrected page. She had worked steadily for exactly 1 hour, transforming water-damaged documents into legal masterpieces that surpassed the quality of the original translations. The office that had felt like a battleground now seemed strangely quiet, filled with the tension of two people who knew that everything was about to change. Sterling picked up the completed documents with hands that were no longer entirely steady. His eyes scanned pages of perfect legal translation, noting corrections that his expensive firm had missed, and improvements that demonstrated a level of expertise he had never encountered before. Each page represented not just technical skill, but a depth of understanding that came from years of passionate study. "This is impossible," Sterling murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was literally in his hands. Emma stood up from his desk and closed her laptop with quiet dignity. "It's not impossible, Mr. Sterling. It's just what happens when someone decides to see potential instead of prejudice." Sterling reached for his phone again and called a third translation service, one based in Switzerland that specialized in international legal documents. When they confirmed that Emma's work was not only accurate, but superior to the original translations, he hung up and stared at her in absolute silence for nearly a minute. "You did it," he said finally. "You actually did it." Emma nodded simply. "I told you I could fix the problem I created. Now, about your promise." Sterling's business instincts, honed by decades of corporate maneuvering, kicked into overdrive. His initial shock was giving way to something more familiar, the need to maintain control and save face. He cleared his throat and straightened his tie, trying to reassemble the authoritative persona that had been so thoroughly shaken. "Look, you're obviously very talented," Sterling said, falling back on the patronizing tone that had served him well in previous negotiations. "But let's be realistic here. This was just a lucky break, a one-time performance under pressure. Real business requires consistency, reliability, experience that only comes with years in the professional world." Emma tilted her head slightly, studying Sterling with the same calm attention she had given to the legal documents. "So you're saying my work isn't good enough?" Sterling waved his hand dismissively. "I'm saying that translating a few documents doesn't qualify someone for serious responsibility. The business world is complicated, sweetheart. It requires connections, credentials, a certain level of sophistication that—" He trailed off as Emma pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. She put the call on speaker, and after 2 rings, a crisp British accent filled the office. "United Nations Translation Services, Geneva office. This is Director Margaret Chen speaking." Sterling's eyes widened. Even he knew that name. Margaret Chen was one of the most respected figures in international diplomacy. "Hello, Director Chen," Emma said calmly. "This is Emma Rodriguez. I'm calling about the position you offered me last month." There was a pause, then obvious delight in the voice from Geneva. "Emma, How wonderful to hear from you. Have you reconsidered our offer? We would be thrilled to have you join our team as a junior translator for the Human Rights Council. Sterling's mouth fell open. The United Nations didn't make job offers to random teenagers, especially not positions that typically required graduate degrees and years of experience. Actually, I'm calling because I'm currently with someone who believes that young people from working-class families can't handle sophisticated professional work. Emma said, her eyes never leaving Sterling's face. I thought you might be able to provide some perspective on that viewpoint. Director Chen's laugh was warm but sharp. Oh my. Well, please tell this person that Emma Rodriguez is one of the most gifted linguists we've encountered in 20 years of international recruitment. She declined our offer because she wanted to finish her American education first, but we've kept the position open specifically for her. Sterling sank back into his chair, as if the air had been knocked out of him. You turned down a job at the United Nations? Emma ended the call and put her phone away. I turned down 3 UN positions, actually, also offers from the World Health Organization, the International Court of Justice, and Doctors Without Borders, because my mother needed me more than international organizations needed another translator. The magnitude of what Emma was telling him hit Sterling like a physical blow. This girl had sacrificed opportunities that most people could only dream of, giving up a chance to work at the highest levels of global diplomacy to stay home and take care of her injured mother. The same mother whose job Sterling had just threatened to destroy out of petty spite. I don't understand, Sterling said weakly. If you had those opportunities, why are you here? Why is your mother cleaning offices? Emma's expression grew sad but determined. Because choosing family over career isn't something that people like you understand, Mr. Sterling. My mother has worked 2 jobs since I was 8 years old to make sure I had everything I needed to succeed. When she was injured and couldn't work full-time anymore, I wasn't going to abandon her to chase my own ambitions. Sterling looked around his office, at the awards and photographs that celebrated his individual achievements, at the luxury that surrounded him like armor against the ordinary world. For the first time in his adult life, he felt small and petty in the face of genuine sacrifice and love. You chose her over everything, he said quietly. Emma nodded. And I would make the same choice again tomorrow. Success without the people you love isn't success at all, Mr. Sterling. It's just expensive loneliness. The words hung in the air between them like a verdict. Sterling realized that in threatening Emma's family, he had revealed more about his own character than all his business accolades ever could. This teenage girl had shown him a kind of strength and integrity that his world of corporate achievement had never taught him to recognize. I owe you an apology, Sterling said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Several apologies, actually. Emma remained standing, her posture straight and dignified. I don't need apologies, Mr. Sterling. I need you to keep your word about treating my mother and me with basic human respect. Sterling nodded slowly, then reached for his desk phone and dialed an internal number. Security. This is Sterling. I need you to find Maria Rodriguez from the night cleaning crew and ask her to come to my office immediately. Tell her it's important, but she's not in trouble. 20 minutes later, Maria Rodriguez stood in the doorway of Marcus Sterling's office, her dark eyes wide with concern as she took in the scene before her. Her daughter sat calmly in one of Sterling's expensive client chairs, while the CEO himself looked distinctly uncomfortable behind his massive desk. Water stains on important-looking documents told a story that Maria's mother's intuition was already beginning to piece together. Emma, mija, what happened? Maria asked in Spanish, rushing to her daughter's side. Emma stood up and hugged her mother, switching seamlessly to Spanish as she explained the evening's events. Sterling watched the interaction with growing fascination, noting how Emma's entire demeanor softened when she spoke to her mother, transforming from confident professional back into a loving teenage daughter. She's telling you what happened. Sterling said when the rapid Spanish conversation paused. And she's probably being far more generous about my behavior than I deserve. Maria looked between her daughter and her employer, confusion clear on her weathered face. Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry if my daughter caused any trouble. She was just looking for me, and sometimes she gets curious about— Mrs. Rodriguez. Sterling interrupted gently. Your daughter didn't cause trouble. She prevented it. In fact, she may have just saved my company from a very expensive legal disaster. Sterling stood up and walked around his desk, positioning himself at eye level with both women rather than looming over them from his position of authority. The gesture was small but significant, a conscious choice to abandon the power dynamics that had defined his interactions with employees for decades. I owe both of you an apology, Sterling continued. I said things tonight that were inexcusable, made threats that were cruel and unfair. I judged your daughter based on her appearance and your circumstances rather than recognizing her remarkable abilities. Maria's confusion deepened. I don't understand, sir. Emma took her mother's hand and squeezed it gently. Mama, I had to tell him about my languages, about the studying I've been doing. Maria's eyes widened with sudden understanding. Oh, Mia, your secret. Sterling looked between mother and daughter, realizing that there were depths to this family's story that he was only beginning to comprehend. What secret? Emma took a deep breath and looked at her mother for permission. Maria nodded encouragingly, and Emma began to speak. For the past 6 years, I've been teaching myself advanced linguistics and international law, Emma said. I have certifications in 7 languages, and I've been offered positions with several international organizations, but I turned them all down because I didn't want to leave my mother alone. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of pride rather than sadness. She never told me about the job offers. I knew she was brilliant, but I didn't realize. Sterling felt something crack open in his chest, a wall he had built around his heart through decades of corporate ruthlessness. Here was a family that had faced real hardship with dignity and love, while he surrounded himself with luxury and treated people like disposable resources. Mrs. Rodriguez, Sterling said carefully, I'd like to make you an offer. I'm promoting you to head of building services with a salary increase of 60% and full health benefits for your entire family. And Emma, if you're interested, I'd like to offer you a part-time position as our international correspondence consultant. The work would be flexible enough for you to continue your education while gaining real-world experience. Emma and Maria exchanged glances, having an entire conversation in the span of a few seconds, the way mothers and daughters do. That's very generous, Mr. Sterling, Emma said slowly. But I have conditions. Sterling raised an eyebrow. In his experience, people offered jobs by Marcus. Sterling said, Yes, sir. And thank you, sir, not I have conditions. Go ahead, he said. Emma straightened her shoulders, every inch the confident negotiator despite her 15 years. First, I want written guarantees that all building service employees will receive fair wages and respectful treatment. Second, I want the company to establish a scholarship fund for children of service workers who show academic promise. And third, I want your personal commitment that what happened tonight, the threats, the dismissive attitude, the assumption that poor people can't be intelligent, never happens to anyone else in this building. Sterling stared at her for a long moment, then began to laugh. But this time, his laughter held genuine admiration rather than mockery. You know what, Emma Rodriguez? You drive a harder bargain than most of my board members. He extended his hand to her. You have a deal. As Emma shook his hand, Sterling realized that he was agreeing to far more than employment terms. He was committing to becoming the kind of leader who saw potential instead of prejudice, who recognized that talent and character could emerge from the most unexpected places. 6 months later, Sterling Corporation had implemented every change Emma had requested. The company's treatment of service workers became a model for other businesses, and the scholarship fund had already helped 12 young people pursue higher education. Emma worked part-time as an international consultant while maintaining perfect grades in high school, and her story had inspired other companies to look beyond traditional credentials when identifying talent. As for Sterling himself, he found that treating employees as human beings rather than disposable resources actually improved productivity and company morale. The arrogant CEO, who had once threatened to destroy a family over a workplace accident, had been replaced by a leader who understood that true success came from lifting others up rather than stepping on them. On the anniversary of that water-soaked night in his office, Sterling called Emma into a meeting. She arrived carrying the same patched backpack, though now it contained textbooks from the advanced courses she was taking through dual enrollment at the local university. "I have something for you," Sterling said, sliding an envelope across his desk. Inside was a letter of recommendation addressed to Harvard University's School of International Relations, written on Sterling Corporation letterhead and signed by Marcus Sterling himself. "When you're ready," Sterling said simply, "your future is waiting for you. And this time, you won't have to choose between family and opportunity. The scholarship fund will take care of your mother's needs while you're in school." Emma looked up from the letter with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say." Sterling smiled, and for the first time in years, the expression reached his eyes. "Say you'll remember that talent doesn't have an address, potential doesn't wear expensive clothes, and sometimes the most important lessons come from people we least expect to teach us." Emma Rodriguez had entered Sterling's office as an invisible teenager whose mother cleaned his building. She left as a young woman who had changed not just her own future, but the entire culture of one of the city's most powerful corporations. And sometimes, if you knew where to look, you could still see water stains on Marcus Sterling's desk, permanent reminders of the night when everything changed, one spilled cup at a time. The story spread through business circles like wildfire, becoming legend among those who believed that character mattered more than credentials. And in offices across the city, other CEOs began to wonder what talent might be walking through their halls, unnoticed and underestimated, waiting for someone to see beyond appearances to the extraordinary potential that exists in every human heart. Emma Rodriguez proved that night that the most powerful force in business isn't money or connections or prestigious degrees. It's the courage to stand up, speak out, and show the world that everyone deserves a chance to prove their worth. And sometimes, just sometimes, that chance comes disguised as a disaster, waiting for someone brave enough to turn catastrophe into opportunity.